Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another webinar by Royal Cyber. Our topic for today is Readiness and Roadmap to CCPA. My name is Pratik Nilkund, and I'll be your host and speaker for today. Just some housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat window and we'll address them towards the end of our presentation. Also, if anyone is not able to view my screen or hear me properly, kindly notify me in the chat window. Now, before we start, I want to talk about a little bit about Royal Cyber and today's agenda. Well, we are an IT consulting and digital transformation company, and since 2002, we have successfully completed over 1,500 projects for 600 plus happy clients in five of the seven continents, namely North America, South America, Europe, Australia, and Asia. Especially a strong presence in the Middle East. We have gained significant recognition from our customers and partners worldwide over the years, including some Fortune 500 companies for providing best in class services and solutions across multiple domains. We would, during these testing times, like to focus on helping the community and support businesses by offering 1 month of complimentary services on all our offerings, be it commerce, cloud, mobile, analytics, middleware, or data governance and privacy. The details of our complimentary services are outlined in our closing slides. So, this is how the agenda looks like for today. We will start with some data privacy facts and a few key trends before diving into the specifics of California Consumer Privacy Act or CCPA. Thereafter, we will capture some really basic data privacy compliance essentials and demo a few important concepts as well. We will then sum up the webinar by sharing some of the insights we gained and lessons we learned from GDPR and CCPA remediation projects. Since data governance, data security, and privacy and acts like GDPR, CCPA, and LGPD are pretty broad topics, will not be able to cover everything entirely. However, we will conduct regular webinars weekly or bi-weekly to deep dive into each of these important topics. All right, so let's get started. Data privacy refers to the protection of data with regards to its collection, usage, and distribution. Now, the term data in this case, in the case of data privacy, typically refers to any information that could personally identify someone, such as their name, address, phone number, credit card information, among many other things. So, as represented in the slide, 64 countries are legislated. 8% countries are on the verge, as well as 18% countries have little to no legislation, and around 11% countries have no data at all. So this statistic is a pretty clear indicator that there is certainly an unprecedented expansion in data privacy and security regulations globally as regulators seek to catch up to new technologies. So some jurisdictions focus on the notions of privacy as a fundamental right, while others are directed more towards the fairness or consumer protection aspect of it. As a result, these divergent global data privacy and security regulations can be challenging to apply and interpret. Moving on, we have identified some key trends we believe will define the world of privacy. So let us look at some of these, not a matter of if, but a matter of when points. So I came across a saying which said, as California goes, so goes the nation. Right. So California recently established itself as the early leader in domestic privacy legislation, and a handful of other states such as Maine and Nevada passed smaller but significant laws. So data privacy legislation was also a major focus for state governments in New York, Texas, and Washington in 2019. It's widely anticipated that more states will inevitably follow. So, state privacy laws create new and significant business challenges, especially for organizations with widespread operations. To avoid a mix-up of these data privacy laws, which would drive higher compliance costs and could slow business growth in general, it's widely expected that there will be an increased push towards a federal privacy law. Now, the struggle to comply with increasingly stringent privacy laws across geographies and industries has put a strain on many data privacy and compliance teams. In addition, the cost of compliance has increased significantly. So, choosing a unified enterprise wide data privacy strategy requires significant research and resources upfront. But once implemented, it can significantly reduce future efforts. And we do see a lot of companies are increasingly taking this route. Uh, this is more of an ongoing trend than a new trend, but expect to see privacy and security functions to intertwine. So, data privacy regulations have become a significant driving factor in increased cybersecurity measures, legally requiring companies to ensure data security and adding to the potential financial fallout of a data breach. To this end, CISOs and their security teams need to become more educated on new data privacy laws and their changing requirements. So, when we talk about GDPR related responsibilities, we believe that data privacy trend will include a shift in the compliance responsibilities within the organization. More and more companies will understand that a single role like a DPO will be incapable of single handedly managing, supervising, and implementing data protection laws and policies. Also, heavy focus will be on third party risk management, risk assessment, and demands on suppliers, vendors, and partners to demonstrate compliance. Last but not the least, we cannot stress enough on how important transparency will become for organizations, especially B2C companies. Consumers will become more aware of their rights eventually and the dollar sign that stands next to their data. Trust will not only be a nice to have addition to businesses, but a must have. All right. So let's take a deep dive into CCPA now, and I would like to start with an overview first. Well, CCPA applies to for-profit businesses that do business in California, collects or receives personal information of California residents, and meets just one of these three categories, which are has a gross revenue of over $25 million, collects personal data for 50,000 or more consumers, and obtains at least half of its annual revenues by selling consumers' personal data. The law allows consumers to sue companies for non-compliance with fines of up to $2,500 per violation or $7,500 per intentional violation. To put the fines in context, some days ago it came to light that Facebook's app may have been opening iPhone cameras in the background without their users' knowledge. So the bug was detected on iOS 13.2.2, but not on iOS 12. So video and potentially sound recordings, which could easily be linked to individuals and therefore constitute personal information under the CCPA and the GDPR, were collected without the knowledge of these app users, therefore violating GDPR and CCPA. Assuming approximately 36 million European, 5.5 million Californians, and 650,000 Nevadan users ran the Facebook app on iOS 13.2.2, this could lead to the damages of up to $41 billion and just within CCPA. This example is a clear demonstration that CCPA can damage businesses to a far greater extent than the GDPR. Now, let us look at some of the provisions under the CCPA. The CCPA takes the position that consumers own their privacy information and provides them five general rights for their personal information. Under the Act, California consumers will have the right to know what personal information is collected, to know whether and to whom their personal information is sold or disclosed, and to opt out of its sale. Note that a business must explicitly inform consumers that their information may be sold to third parties, and that they have the right to opt out of the sale of PI through a website link on the business's homepage titled "Do Not Sell My Personal Information." Consumers will also have the right to access their personal information that has been collected. Uh, Consumers now can request a business to delete their personal information, and businesses will not be able to businesses cannot discriminate against a particular consumer for exercising their rights under the CCPA Act. All right. So, it's widely anticipated that more governing bodies will implement privacy and consent regulations with heftier consequences for non-compliance. The next few slides distills the California Consumer Privacy Act into discrete initiatives to help a business achieve and then maintain compliance. So let's deep dive into each one of them. So one of the primary requirements of data privacy acts are to create and maintain data inventories to visualize the flow of data across the organization and generate records of processing and other compliance reporting. It is equally important that the data stored is accurate and up to date. Now, history answers many questions. Tracking the who, what, where, when, and why for your consumers' data will make it easier to fill those missing gaps and account for data breaches. So, data lineage plays a vital role in CCPA by cataloging and modeling where data exists within an organization as well as where it flows. Allowing a full transparency on what data is collected, where it is stored, who has access, and how it is used can help can help by having a look at these data lineages. Now, when we let's talk about the three levels of inventories and that can house data, right? So it can be assets, business processes, or vendors. For an asset, it is important to track where consumer data is stored and how it flows throughout the enterprise. Also, how to access and retrieve data sets. However, the most important part is to identify where personal information associated to an individual is located. For a business process, it is important to track business process and legal basis for capturing this data. It's important to spot processes that involve the sales of data and visualize risks in flows. For a vendor, it is mandatory to track where service provider riders are present, and especially if there is any sale of data. An organization also needs to track third party data transfers and understand proper channels to notify vendors in the case of a consumer request. Now, we have discussed, what needs to be covered, right? What inventories companies can possibly have, but we should also look at the different mechanisms that are used to map these data elements, right? So let's look at, there are like two options for an organization to improve its understanding of personal data through data flow mapping. The first option is to conduct a manual information search, which is largely your data mapping questionnaires. Now, the data is usually gathered via in-person or paper surveys before being collected and analyzed. The other option is to engage in a technology assisted search to gather the necessary information about how data flows through the organization. This can either be gathered through electronic questionnaires that are filled in online or via scanners that detect data collection and its movement across the electronic systems of the organization. If the processes are done correctly, both the manual and automated processes will achieve the same result. However, there are benefits and drawbacks to each processes, so the ultimate result from two independent efforts may be different. So this is just an example of some of couple of tools that we came across. The traditional data discovery is scanning the organization for performing for understanding what data is stored within them, but this provides a very limited context. And also, once a consumer requests certain information, it is the responsibility of the organization to respond to that request and provide the details of the consumer's information, right? So targeted data discovery looks up individual data based on application layer logic that exists, or a targeted query. So what it does is, once a request comes in, it fetches information which is stored at an application level, or at a database level. It is also the second part is to update vendor agreements and template contracts, and that too falls under internal governance. Contracts with third parties with whom personal information about California residents is shared will need to be updated to comply with CCPA requirements. Third-party data processors whom company rely upon will need to ensure they are meeting CCPA compliance. Take steps to require documentation of processing activities and security standards, and also ensure there is a distinction between the transfer of data for processing purposes and transfer of data for a sale. It is also necessary to document and establish communication with vendors to be able to notify the vendor to accommodate some CCPA requests. Now, although CCPA enforcement is a pretty broad term, I would like to demo a couple of important modules later on in this webinar. The tool we are using for demonstration purposes is OneTrust. However, we strongly suggest assessing the as-is compliance state, the maturity model, and the best fitment for your organization before arriving at a conclusion. There are a lot of great tools out there, and we generally use a combination of 3 to 4 tools for our implementation efforts as well. Now, to ensure consumers can exercise the rights, the business must make available, to consumers at least two designated methods for submitting requests. At a minimum, a toll-free telephone number, and if the business has a website, then a website as address as well. Uh, the The business must also ensure that it has protocols in place to respond to such requests free and within 45 days of receiving a verifiable request. So this is what step 2 of consumer rights request is all about. It starts with the intake of a request, right? So let us look at one of the two ways, which is the interactive web form on the website. Firstly, the request type and customer persona dictates which data subject is making which request, right? For example, if it's a customer or an employee or a contractor, so this is very crucial to determine the actions that need to be taken once coupled with the kind of request the consumer is making. Is it a request to delete or access, or is it a do not sell, and the likes of it. So customer persona helps when data is pulled from the systems and may give an idea of which table to look at. Depending on the request, the verification process can be made adaptive. We have a short demo in a couple of slides to paint a better picture on the web form. So, verifying a user's identity is one of the primary challenges for teams completing consumer rights request. While identity verification is required by the law, it also helps to avoid businesses and ethical dilemmas, such as potentially providing personal information to fraudsters. If you look at the NIST framework for identity verification, a lot of times you can break this down into two buckets. Individuals either know something or have something. For example, I know my name, my account number, or password, which can be asked, why, and only I would know and can be verified against some of my records. Or I may have something like a phone or to text or an email ID to receive a verification email, or perhaps a document to upload. Again, it boils down to the data subject making the request and the sensitivity of the request. The most important part of the whole consumer rights lifecycle is fulfilling the request. It is at this stage that the retrieval and action for the data occurs. So, just a brief statistics. Every privacy act may come up with its own set of consumer rights, and every right needs to be accommodated by having a corresponding workflow. But in case of CCPA, it can be either a deletion request, a do not sell request, or an access request. As per a survey conducted by DataGrail, deletion request was the most common request made by consumers at 39.6% and closely followed by do not sell request at 33.3%. Now, let us go to OneTrust to understand the mechanism.
All right, so I have logged into the OneTrust environment for Royal Cyber. If I click on this icon here, I can see that there are different modules, and we have to focus on the data subject request for now. But just an overview of data mapping as well, because we went through it in our preceding slides. At the moment I click on data mapping, it shows all the different inventories that then organization can have, right? So this is just a dashboard. It'll tell us what are the different assets, processing activities, and all such details. The moment I click on assets, I can see that one asset which has been added to OneTrust, which is the Salesforce CRM. The moment I click on Salesforce CRM, I can see the different asset attributes, or the fields that need to be filled in, right? So the general information, the risk summary, the hosting information, data processing information would be the different storage formats, the what is the volume of the data subjects that is housed within this particular asset, and the data retention policy for how long is the data stored under this asset. Also some of the security questions. So all these attributes are present within assets. Also, the most important being related data elements. What data elements are captured under this particular asset? If I were to do an ad, I can see that there is one customer already, and some of the data elements are already been marked, but I can also add other data subjects as well. I can deselect all of them. Now for the timing, I'll just deselect all. I'll select under biometric, I'll select facial recognition and fingerprint. Then I'll scroll down under browsing information, I'll select browsing time and cookie information. And I'll scroll even further and I'll select personal email, address, and phone number. All right, for under data category contact information. And last but not the least, I will select the first name and the last name. All right, so I'll select the first name and I will select the last name, and I'll update it. So once I update it, I'll see that this is the related data elements is updated by all the selections that we made. And the process is very similar to processing activities as well. The only difference being that we can select what are the related assets to it with respect to source, storage, and destination. So that will kind of give us the lineage of what are the different application system touch points for a particular consumer data subject. Okay, so this is what it looks like. We can have an assessment automation done. So in order to fill in these fields, right, we can either do it manually, okay, or we can have an assessment set up to be filled out by those application owners and process owners. We can leverage some of the templates that OneTrust provides. So for example, I'll just select CCPA, and I'll see that there are different templates which are available for one for CCPA compliance. uh, and all this all the questions which are provided. So once I select this template and I save it, it is ready to launch, which I can see under this assessment automation. I click on one which has already been published, right? And I can I am in a position now to send it to my to my respondents in order for them to fill it and get it approved, so that our asset attributes are mapped. Okay, so that once that assessment information is being filled out by our application owners or process owners, our either our assets or processing activity attributes will be filled out. Okay, so let us have a look at the one that we just discussed before signing into OneTrust, which is your data subject request. This is a dashboard which tells us all the requests that we have received, and how many requests have been completed, and what are the what is the average time to complete these requests. We can also see the requests that we have received by country. If we are to look at these requests in detail, I'll have to click on request on the left hand side, and I can see all the requests, and by different stages that we have received. We can also customize what fields do we want to see, and what fields we want to ignore by choosing the column selector. We can also export it if you want to view it in a PDF or an Excel format. So that can be arranged, right? Also, at the same time, we have gone through some of the we had gone through the web form concept, so that can be again built by using OneTrust. I can see that a customer has can exercise different rights by clicking the different request types. But the most important, although a lot of customization in terms of styling and text and form fields can be present, the most important is to have a workflow associated with the request type, right? So in the web form we see that there are three different request types: access my information, delete my information, and do not sell my information. So all of them should have a corresponding workflow that has been customized to that particular request, right? So if the request type is equal to access my information, we are telling the system to follow an access workflow which has been built under the workflow section. So if I click on access, if I can click on workflow, I'll see all the different workflows. I click on access workflow. I can see that for this workflow there are different stages which are present, right? So the first step is obviously to verify the request, then to fulfill this request, which is basically for if we have a request from, say, Mr. Smith, Thomas, or we can kind of query our applications and systems manually to consolidate that information, and then get it reviewed by the legal team before sending it out, or before um, notifying the consumer, right? So each of the stages will have a title, will have a description or a guidance text for understanding what that stage is all about. And also we can customize these requests as well. We can have a user subtask for each of these stages. We can have an assignee. Currently I'm just assigning it to me. I can mention the task name and the task description. Also I can set up alerts as to when that assignee should be reminded, or let's say 10 days. Okay, so this assignee will be, the deadline will be 10 days after the start stage, whereas I just want the reminders to be sent to that particular assignee 5 days before the deadline, right? So that time I'll the assignee, whoever is the assignee, in this case me, will receive this particular reminder, and I'll it's my duty now to close this subtask, and then advance it to the next stage for different teams to have a look at it. So all that can be customized. And also there are a lot of response templates here which can be leveraged in order to better, more professionally deliver our responses to different consumer requests. So, and also we can add new as we go along. If we are not comfortable with some of the templates which are within OneTrust, we can add new templates as well, right? So basically, we'll have, as I mentioned on a couple of occasions, we'll have different um, uh, we'll have different presentations and webinars going forward, and we'll have more demos as well to capture these individual modules. However, for now, let's move on to the next slides in the presentation.
So this is what the request fulfillment looks like. It can be manual, wherein we intake it from a web form. We intake the request from a web form and perform a lot of manual steps. So this is sometimes known as a death by a thousand cuts, because a lot of applications need to be queried for fulfilling the request. But at the same time, it can be automated, right? Once we get a consumer request, we can have systems in place to pull that information out for a particular request, then consolidate it in a form of a report, and then attach it to a PDF, and then send it back to the consumer. So it can be a combination of both um, uh, it can be a combination of both robotic process automation and your machine learning and AI tools in the marketplace. So obviously, once the request has been fulfilled, we need a place where we can track, or we can have a counter for all the requests that has been put forth. So it's obviously important to track the history of requests to understand resourcing requirements, and improve the process as well going forward. All right. So the next step is policy and disclosure management. So, covered businesses need to update their privacy policies and other relevant disclosure to ensure consumers are provided the information required by the CCPA at the appropriate time. So, regarding privacy policies, businesses must disclose the list of categories of data sold in the past 12 months, provide consumers with categories of personal information collected and the purpose of collection, also provide consumers with the categories of personal information sold and the third parties to whom the information was sold, an updated list of data categories collected in the past 12 months, a complete do not sell my personal information link for opting out of third party sales, an explanation of how California residents can exercise their rights, as well as descriptions of the new rights given to all California residents. So it's very much necessary. So step 4 is more of an ongoing thing, right? The compliance, CCP compliance, we know that tomorrow there'll be certain amendments to it possibly. So we also need to stay on top of these new updates as they develop, and accommodate these new updates as they come. It's also necessary to assess the privacy programs compliance as a state, as well as identify areas of improvement, and to the end goal is to mature over time. That brings us to the key lessons that we learned while our tryst with some of the CCPA and GDPR projects. Point number 1 is leadership and multi disciplinary collaboration. Executive support and a multidisciplinary team is essential to a successful implementation. The requirements imposed by the CCPA are similarly, too extensive to be addressed with paper policy changes alone, and too complex for individual business units to develop isolated compliance approaches. While the effort is a response to a new law, the process for achieving compliance with the CCPA should not be viewed or managed solely as a legal undertaking. So, determining ownership within the organization and acquiring resources from multiple groups within the organization to successfully implement the CCPA will be a significant effort. But we've seen that most successful compliance efforts are the product of a strong leader appropriately situated within the organization, and this needs to be taken seriously. Also, budget appropriate funds as soon as possible. Budgeting for the extensive efforts required to comply with the CCPA as well as the GDPR was, a bit of a hot potato for many companies. But the impact of this compliance effort within organization was also wide ranging. While the budgeting allocations for the CCPA effort will necessarily be specific to each organization, the lessons learned from GDPA and CCPA, GDPR and CCPA is to tackle this issue sooner rather than later, so that CCPA implementation effort is not derailed or delayed by internal conflicts. There is no time to waste, as most organizations will take time to assess and implement the many likely IT and business process changes required by July 1st, 2020. So, a good data inventory and map is essential to compliance efforts and extremely time consuming. The CCPA will require companies to track data of California residents within their enterprise, provide information about the data to those residents, and track and control the disposition and use of that data within and outside the organization. Though painful and time consuming to generate, a well crafted data inventory can serve multiple purposes. It provides the initial foundational understanding of which compliance effort is managed, but can also be used to demonstrate and track compliance on an ongoing basis. The point of the exercise is to understand what personal information resides within the organization, its sources and uses, and the internal and external systems that process it. However, CCPA will also likely require some changes to the implicated systems and business processes. It is necessary to include and initiate a vendor management work stream early on in your compliance efforts. As data mapping process will reveal in stark detail, most organizations rely on a vast network of third party relationships ranging from service providers to marketing partners and co-branded relationships. So having said that, identifying these relationships and determining how to address these compliance efforts will be a significant challenge, one that is made more complicated given the inherent dependency on third parties. Many will have little incentive to engage in the process, but it is crucial to allot significant time in the compliance effort to assess these third party relationships, develop a compliance approach for both new and existing third party relationships, and implement that approach for existing relationships as well. So, as mentioned in our opening slide, we are here to help you through the COVID pandemic and have rolled out 1 month of complimentary services. During this time, a group of experts will configure tools to your environment and provide a training on these tools. Will also help to assess, the as-is compliance state and where you need to be to govern your organization better, not only for compliance purposes but to dramatically boost the operational efficiency of the organization. If you are interested or would like to meet us virtually, feel free to drop us an email on info@royalcyber.com. A big thank you for hearing us out today, and I would like to initiate the question and answer round, and we would like to go through some of the questions which have come from chat today. So let's have a look at them.